Awesome. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming along to my talk today. My name is Jamie Sanson, and I'm the Principal Software Engineer for Android at TradeMe. The title of my talk today, as you can see, is Materializing a Design System with Material Design Components. Now, before I go any further, just a quick reminder, there is Slido for this talk, so if you come up with any questions along the way, please note them down, and we'll get to them at the end. So as an introduction, here's a little bit about TradeMe. So we're New Zealand's oldest and largest auction platform, allowing Kiwis to buy and sell things from other Kiwis. TradeMe started all the way back in 1999, and over the years, it's grown from a small site maintained by a few people to a platform that services almost 1 in 6 Kiwis every day. In 2012, someone realized it was time to enter the Android space. And by 2013, we'd released our first Android app. And again, as you can see, things have changed considerably over the years at TradeMe. Not only has our brand evolved, but the way in which we build our apps has too, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. Now, before we go any further, it's worth noting that it's not just one app I'm talking about here. At TradeMe, we've also split off into niche apps for some of our business units. So the orange icon here is our app specifically for job hunters. And green is specifically those for looking for property. The yellow app does everything and anything that you can at TradeMe. And it's worth noting too that we've got more than just Android. We've also got the same apps on iOS, and that will become important later. So I am here to talk today about design systems and how we've built one at TradeMe on top of material components. There's a bit more to understand, though, before we get into building this thing. I mean, first off, what even is a design system anyway? Now, my first port of call for this was Wikipedia, and this is what I found. A design system is a set of interconnected patterns and shared practices coherently organized to aid in digital product design and development. Now, that's a bunch of words, right? There's quite a lot to digest there. So the way that I like to think about design systems is by looking at examples to kind of see how other people within your organization might perceive a design system. Now, first off, there might be product designers out there in your organization who think of a design system as a set of patterns and component libraries, which allow easy mocking up of screens for apps or websites, for example, without having to think about platform intricacies. And designers may also see design systems as the be-all and end-all of brand consistency, specifying the guidelines and brand representation in how we design things. To developers, without too many spoilers, we might see it as a set of themes and styles, which we can apply to components within our app. Or to developers, it might look like UI components, views and layouts, which we can easily drop in and meet design specifications with. On the topic of components, to the QA engineers out there, they may see design systems as bringing about more code reuse, and therefore better quality assurances. Instead of building bespoke UI and coming up with components on the fly, we're reusing the same component over and over again, which means we only need to test it once to ensure that it works in every other usage of it. Product managers may look at design systems as a way of introducing common behaviors between platforms, bridging the gap between Android and iOS. In this screenshot here, you can see our place a bid process between iOS and Android. It does look kind of different. Obviously, the one on the left is clearly iOS, the one on the right is clearly Android, but they're very similar in what they're trying to achieve. Delivery managers may look at design systems as a method of speeding up all things delivery. Prototyping and implementing designs is a matter of piecing together components. And collaboration between design and development is seamless because you all now speak the same language. And last but not least, our customers get to understand what our design systems are. They grow accustomed to our consistent look and feel between what here on our left is our website and on the right is our Android app. And they become familiar with our brand so that they know when they're using a product, it's probably TradeMe. And really, a design system is kind of all of the above and everything in between. A design system is kind of a way of working. It lets us build things quickly, consistently, and ultimately providing a better user experience for our customers. So design systems are great for a number of reasons. They get out of our way and let us focus on creating delightful user experiences. And there's a lot of large organizations out there that use them to speed things up, Google being one of them. A lot of these organizations even make their design systems public to allow other designers and developers to design and build products alongside theirs that look and feel the same. Given this, though, there's this design system expert, Danny Banks, who estimates that only 10% of these public design systems cater for mobile application development. Now, you may have spotted this mentioned in a couple of places before, but what I'm talking about today is Tangram, our design system at TradeMe, and how we've leveraged material components to build it out on Android. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to quickly share the journey we went through to get here. Now, Tangram at TradeMe has existed for a number of years, originally being introduced as a way of building out UI on our new Angular-based website. So we started it quite a number of years ago, actually now, which meant come 2019, our design system was incredibly comprehensive for the web. The problem that we ran into, though, was that Tangram didn't support native platforms, making us one of the 90%. So in 2019, we aimed to change that. We knew it'd be hard, and over the years, there were actually a number of unanswered questions that we had kind of formed that had held us back from really starting the journey to building a native mobile design system. And these are these questions. So first off, TradeMe brand is actually a pretty big thing. That yellow that you might have seen on a few slides before is kind of like a household color, I guess, in New Zealand. And we wanted to understand how we balance brand presence, and platform behavior. As I mentioned before, Tangram has to service both iOS and Android. But clearly, these are two separate platforms. They behave in different ways, and our customers expect them to kind of act in these different ways. So what we needed to do was understand where to follow the platform and where to diverge and go custom. And finally, something that some of you may be familiar with as well, what we found at TradeMe after running a survey before kicking off this work is that a large proportion of our designers weren't confident with building designs for Android. So what we really wanted to do is kind of create the system which would allow them to be more confident and build systems and flows for Android. So we wanted to know the future of design for our mobile apps. And so to answer these questions, we embarked on a project we called Design Vision for Mobile. The goal of this was to create components and patterns for iOS and Android for our Tangram design system, allowing mobile designers and developers to deliver cohesive and on-brand TradeMe experiences to our members faster. Now, in practice, this project manifested as a bunch of workshops. The first two streams of these workshops were heavily design-focused, only having designers in the room, and the remaining two were focused around feasibility and implementation. The first stream was titled Blue Sky. In these workshops, our designers got together and compiled a bunch of blue sky mocks to explore where our apps could go in the future. From there, they reined in these mocks and produced something known as a golden thread. It might look a little small on your screen, but this is the graph down the bottom here. And what this shows is where we should be dialing up and dialing down the presence of our brand. So for things like login screens, we want to be really bringing our brand forward because that's kind of one of the first interactions new customers may have with TradeMe. But when we get to things like our search results or the listings that members have listed on our site, that's their content. We really want to dial our brand back and let that shine through. Now, the second stream of workshops that we ran was also a heavily design-based workshop, and that was called the Conceptual Vision workshops. So in this one, our designers came together and worked back outwards from that golden thread that they'd established in the previous set of workshops. Again, they were working towards something blue sky and kind of out there, quite different to the designs that we had in the app at the moment. But applying that golden thread and roping in the brand presence on screens where it made sense. So here you can see the splash screen is quite heavily TradeMe. There's that big bold yellow in the illustration. Whereas if you get onto the listing page, which is maybe the fourth one in, we're really highlighting the seller of that listing. The third streams of workshops, we called these style guide workshops, and this is where developers started to come in. One thing you might have noticed in those previous two mocks is that they were both iOS. And so these sessions brought together designers and developers to help shift the thinking from one platform to somewhere in the middle. And really the way these workshops manifested was just a bunch of developers and designers in a small room for 4 days, working to see what we could realize and to help solidify what is actually feasible. And so that was that. By the end of the workshops, we had a clear vision of where the design of our apps was going, and we had feasibility and platform intricacies in mind at the same time. Along the way, we kind of came up with answers to the 3 of those unanswered questions that we had at the start. What we realized is that brand should be present because we still want to show that this is a Trade Me app. But our members' content is really front and center, and that's what we want to prioritize. We kind of want to make Android and iOS as similar as possible. And that kind of comes down to allowing designers to feel more at home when using our design systems. But thirdly, and importantly, we really needed to respect the platforms. Android and iOS do things differently, and without following the platform in some way, we might actually end up making things harder for ourselves later down the track. And at the end of the process, we had a few outputs as well. So first off, our designers started constructing style guides and pattern libraries to use in their designs. Our decisions around accessibility and native versus custom that we made in the workshops were built directly into these pattern libraries. And what that meant is then when designers were using these pattern libraries, they didn't have to make those decisions along the way. This paved the way for the output for the next output of these workshops. And that output of this process is what we actually called the design vision, not to be confused with the other design vision, which was effectively a reskin of our main apps. This change was pretty substantial. It changed how elevation and content play together in our apps. It introduced these large collapsing headers that you can see here. On top of that, it introduced a custom typeface, which is our Trade Me typeface, Story Sans, that was to be used throughout the app. And last but not least, dark mode. From here, we got together a couple of developers, picked up those design vision mocks that we had to start with, keeping in mind what the design pattern library and style guides were kind of looking like at the time, and started to look at how we might implement this. And so we kind of came up with a few different requirements. We needed to build something that had dark mode and color theming support. We needed something that had custom typeface support. We needed something that could house custom components in case we were to build additional kind of views or widgets that we can share between our apps. And on that note, it needs to be shareable between apps, given that we do have 3 apps on each platform. And finally, we need migration to be as easy as it can be. As I mentioned, these apps are getting on. They started work on them in 2012, so the Android apps code base is about 8 years old. Migrating something like that is always going to be hard, but we needed to make it as easy as possible for us. So we figured out what we needed, a design library which we could share between apps, and that we could use to build out our design vision. The first phase in projects like this is kind of a discovery phase, and you see this in quite a lot of large-scale projects. And that's where we sort of started to look at what was out there. I mentioned before that we wanted to respect the system, and I'm sure all of you know, Android and the apps that run on it primarily follows material design. Our pattern libraries ended up following a lot of the same semantics as material, such as elevation, so we decided we'd start there first. And luckily at about this time, development was really ramping up on a library from Google called Material Design Components for Android, or MDC for short. When we started on this discovery work, a large overhaul of this MDC library was in progress. This new version 1.1, was still in beta at the time, but luckily it looked to do everything that we needed to do, and more than that as well. So let's dig into what MDC can do to see why it quickly became our preferred approach. MDC 1.1 and above comes with built-in night mode support for all components. which is actually no small feat given that elevation and light and dark mode behaves in different ways. This simplifies a lot of the dark mode migration work, assuming you don't use hard-code colors to start with. Building your apps with night mode support is as easy as using the day-night variant of the material components theme as the parent of your apps theme. If you're not setting hard-coded text or background colors on any views in your app, or doing anything kind of overly custom, making this change to your app's theme gets you automatic background color changing, text color changing, and even more than that. On the topic of colors, it also comes with this easy-to-use automatic color theming system. So this is a really nice and easy way to support dark mode and color theming while using colors which are named in these really kind of mode agnostic ways, which is really cool. So you'll have things like color surface and color on surface, which mean the same thing in light and dark mode. And customizing components customizing colors for certain components is a breeze, thanks to being able to overwrite styles for components of the design system. Here we're defining a style for a material components button. We're setting the background tint of the button to use our color secondary. And we can then apply that style to every material button within the app by setting the predefined material button style theme attribute. The material design system also comes with really nice standardized typography support, which we were able to leverage to support our own custom typeface. The nice thing about this system is that it introduces this common set of type scales and appearances. What we're doing here is we're sharing naming conventions and definitions between design and development, meaning that it simplifies conversations by saying, that description should be body 2, and that's understood the same way on either side. And again, you can do the same thing as with styles and overwrite those text appearances globally. Here's us setting the text appearance caption theme attribute to something custom, and then using that to set the text appearance on a text view. Another reason why we found it really hard to look past MDC is that the documentation is fantastic. The material design site explains patterns and components in a bunch of details, and the developer documentation is also very comprehensive. On top of the good documentation, there's a bunch of developer advocates from Google who had written a number of super handy blog posts and given a bunch of insightful conference talks. Here's 3 that I've picked out, but really there are a whole heap more. Nick Rout, Chris Baines, and Nick Butcher have all had talks and blog posts about these kind of things. One entry-level talk that I'd highly recommend to everyone out there is a talk called Developing Themes with Style. So at this stage, it was clear that MDC was exactly what we needed. So we chose it to base Tangram off. The only problem is that it wasn't at a stable version yet. Luckily, we knew that a stable version of MDC was around the corner. And so we kind of bet on the beta version of material design components and started building. The stable release for 1.1.0 came just before we started to roll out Tangram, which was perfect, but kind of coincidental timing. So we knew MDC was what we wanted to base Tangram off. We know we need a library, and we had a few things to figure out before we could make use of it. We needed to figure out how we share themes and styles, how we structure our code and resources, how we do our library development practices, including things like linting and cataloging of all the custom components that we build. And finally, we need to think about migrating and how we migrate from the old app-compat way of doing things to making use of Tangram. So the base of all the material components magic that I talked about previously is really in the parent theme, and that enables all that theming magic that we talked about before. The first question that we had was, how do we easily share styles between Tangram and the apps? Do we just extend the material components theme in the app like this? And this actually has a couple of benefits. So it's really quick to get off the ground in doing it this way. And it still gives you all the benefit that we would have had previously. So things like customizable colors, text styles, appearances, you name it. The real problem here, though, is that how do you share this between your apps, right? The only way to really do it, if you think about it, is copy and pasting all those style definitions that you had before, and that's not really a very extensible or maintainable way of doing things. So we couldn't use this approach. However, what if you were to extend something that extended material design components? And so we tried a little something like this. We came up with a theme in another module, which is that theme.tangram that you see down the bottom there. And we based our app themes off this theme, simply changing color attributes in our apps theme to theme components to the specific app. So yellow, green, and orange, as I mentioned before. And easy. As you've seen before, we can now implement those component styles globally within that theme.tangram, and they apply automatically to all components within all our apps. So here's an example of what it looks like to define a style globally. In Tangram, we have 3 different button styles. So we have a primary button, we have a default button, and we have a brand button. And we want all buttons that aren't explicitly primary or brand to be default. So all we need to do is set the button style to default globally. In these examples, we're using a non-bridge material components base theme. And what that means is that we can make use of something called the material components view inflator. This means that whenever we define a button like this in our XML, they automatically get inflated as material buttons. This then picks up that default style that we'd set in our theme, kind of automatically styling our buttons and making it appear like we want to. So again, this is all based on theme hierarchy. So you can define that button style in the library, you could override it in your app, or even in a theme overlay if you want to do it on a kind of a sub-hierarchy of your app. In practice, though, we're still using a bridge theme in the TradeMe app, which essentially means that we can use app compat components alongside material components widgets, Default styling still works nicely, but the problem is you have to be a bit more specific. So when you define an app, you have to fully qualify this material button in our layouts instead. But that gets us to where we want to be. So now it was all kind of starting to come together when we'd specify themes in our Tangram module, and we'd use those themes within the apps. But what about something else that we're trying to do, or everything else that we're trying to do? So we needed to really figure out how to structure our libraries. We have a number of internal libraries at TradeMe, some of them even open source, and we're getting pretty good at structuring our code in an extensible way to be consumed by many applications. The problem is, though, with all of these libraries, we hadn't really considered how we structure resources. Now, again, I'm going to mention that talk Developing Themes with Style, run by Nick Butcher and Chris Baines. And here, Chris introduces a couple of different ways of doing things. So we have Chris's so-called easy mode, which is grouping your resource definitions into a few different buckets, such as theme, styles, and type. And the grouping here is really based on purpose. So the themes file has all your themes and stuff in it. Type has everything to do with text, and styles only has widget styles in it. You can then go a step further and make use of something called hard mode, which is pretty much all of the above, plus some logical groupings. So shape comes in, and that gets its own file called shape.xml. And sysui flags, if you're going edge to edge, goes into a sysui file. And there's a number of benefits to this. And it started to actually look like more what we wanted, kind of splitting things out more and allowing us to make sure that some of those files don't get too massive. But there was still a file in there, styles.xml, that could get massive if we were introducing our own stylings for a bunch of different components in Tangram. So from here, we chose to dial the difficulty up another notch. And so we chose to go another step further, and as well as splitting into logical types, we split into custom view styles into their own files as well. This tree diagram isn't complete. There's a bunch more files in there, but it kind of shows how it works in practice. We still have those similar splits for typography and themes, but we also have separate files for control stylings. For a bit of context, we had to subclass material switch for reasons I won't go hugely into. But because of that, we had to come up with our own widget styling for switch. And that went into the switch styles file. So again, we have this custom component. This example is a little trivial as we only have one style in there. But as soon as we get into things with multiple different appearances, like buttons, for example, the split starts to make more sense. Whenever you need to find something related to a switch, you can just go to the switch styles file. This means, in practice, we've actually got a growing number of XML files under the values directory, which isn't ideal, but that's a trade-off that we're willing to deal with for the convenience that we get out of it. When structuring code, we wanted to keep top-level components easy to access when manually writing layouts in XML. This might be a decision we come to regret later on as our number of components that we've implemented grows. But at the moment, all custom components are in the top-level nz.tangram package. Any utility classes that we write for sharing logic between different widgets goes into their own sub-packages, like color util, for example, might go into the color sub-package. So onto practices. We chose to adopt linting from the get-go, as we think it dramatically helps to improve our code quality. It helps to squash bugs, and it really helps in pull requests to kind of remove the burden of focusing on style-oriented comments. And we're using a few different tools for this. So KT-lint is used for linting Kotlin. All of our lint warnings are thrown as errors, so all of our CI pipelines fail if you were to introduce a new warning, which sounds a little dramatic, but in practice it's actually not that bad if you're only writing little snippets of code. We use a tool called Danger for reporting. So what that does is read the output of our tests or our lint rules and then post those on our pull requests so that we can immediately see what's going on. And finally, we've been experimenting with custom lint rules. And these lint rules apply outside of the library to make sure that we're keeping on top of things like dark mode and not hard coding colors. We've also built a catalog app for testing everything that we build as we build it. And this is actually really useful for a number of reasons. Not only does it allow us to have a sandbox where we can start building something and quickly deploy it to an app that builds incredibly quickly, we can also share this between our designers and developers so that everyone has an idea of what our components look like and how they fit together. Additionally, it gives you a little bit of insight into the options available. On that middle one there, you can see that if you were to tap on a type style, it'll tell you which style to use. Finally, we were looking to migrate to Tangram. And this slide kind of tells the entire story. There are a few things that we needed to do here. So migrate from AppCompat to Tangram, and then migrate from Tangram to Tangram day-night so that we can add dark mode. With that, we wanted to implement a dark mode kill switch such that we can kind of gradually implement dark mode screen by screen. Additionally, we needed to update our text styles. So now we've got dark mode. We need to add in Story Sans, which is our own custom typeface, and finally complete that design vision redesign. And we ran into a couple of stumbles along the way. First off, we had to swap out our old base theme for the Tangram new theme. The problem here that we encountered is that the way that Material thinks about color primary is not the same as the way our 8-year-old app thinks of color primary. So what that meant is that we actually had to change every single reference from being this color/color accent to ATTR/color primary. So instead of being a simple find and replace, it was a much larger find and replace. Secondly, we wanted to kick straight into the dark mode work. And now that we've done the work on the colors to make a lot of our colors attribute-based, this was as easy as changing light to day-night with the inclusion of that kill switch that we mentioned before. From there, we could just go screen by screen and everything worked out nicely. Then we had to look at our text styles. And again, this took a little longer than expected. as we were going through, we kind of realized that we needed to, instead of making use of text appearance, come up with custom text view styles so that we could set additional things in a backwards compatible way, such as letter spacing. So again, that made that change a lot larger than we were anticipating. So at this point, we had our base theme in place, we had dark mode, we had our custom font, and the rest was really history. Our design vision mocks at this point were as simple to implement as really just dropping in components and creating new ones within our Tangram design system, when we didn't have one that suited. And finally, this whole design vision, dark mode, and font overhaul came to a close at the end of July this year. Close to 6 months of work from across the business came together, and we released our newly designed app to New Zealand. Now, this isn't the end of the story. We do actually have a lot more work to do here, and I won't be able to cover that in this talk, but I will in blog post later on, so stay tuned for that. We have to remove the bridge variant of the theme and revisit the workarounds that we introduced for that, such that we can make use of the buttons tag. We then have to implement contribution guidelines such that any other developer from around the business, or designer for that matter, can quite easily contribute to the design system. And finally, we need to prepare for compose. So in conclusion, design systems are more than just a bunch of custom views. What we found is that material components is a really worthy base if it suits your design system, which for us it did. And finally, last but not least, design overhauls of 8-year-old apps are very hard. Cool. Awesome. We have a few questions on Slido already. I'll kick straight into the first one. So, how did you convince the designers that differences between platforms are acceptable, e.g. switch and checkbox components in iOS versus Android? It didn't come down to just the developers trying to convince designers. We actually did a little bit of user research as well at this point, which I probably should have mentioned in the design workshop phase. But effectively what happened is designers took those blue sky kind of conceptual visions out to the public, did some street testing to see how they felt with I guess a bunch of other different designs, as well as differences between native and custom switches and checkboxes and things like that. And what it actually came down to is that our users preferred the system compatibilities. On top of that as well, we also made the point that it's quite a bit harder to implement custom components for everything. So following the system for that, as well as text appearances was another thing. Cool. Moving on to the next question. Do you think it's better to create a custom view in the library or only provide the styles for users to use? And this is a tricky one. I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve with your design system. But I think as your organization scales and as the usage of your design system scales, you kind of want to afford for the ability to create custom views in your libraries. For the most part, I'd imagine all you're doing is sharing styles, especially to start with. For us, most of Tangram for us is actually mostly still custom styles as well. Another benefit as well of setting yourself up for creating custom views is it gets you ready for compose. If you're shipping code in your libraries and have good guidelines around how you do that, when it comes to migrating to compose, it's now really easy to just ship composable functions. Thanks for the question. Cool. And the last question here is, do you have any convention for color naming based on where they're used? So some examples here are color green accept button or by the actual name of the color, so color marine. And yeah, we do actually. I mentioned in the talk that some public design systems have a mobile component. Our design system is public, but doesn't have the mobile component public at the moment. However, if you go to tangram.nz, you can actually see our color palette, which is a bunch of different, I guess, kind of named colors. And then from their usage within the app, we just follow the guidelines from material components. So trying to exclusively make use of like color primary, color accent, and all of those ones. Sweet. The next question is, how do you test changes in your design system, manually or automatically? And this is a good question. If you were in the previous talk by my colleague Dan, he talked a little bit about espresso testing. And we make use of that to make sure there's no kind of glaring changes that stop users being able to navigate. On top of that, though, I think really a lot of it is manual. We've talked about screenshot testing in the past, which I think is probably a pretty good way of automatically testing changes in design systems, just making sure that things kind of look the same and don't change. Yeah, but I guess that's something for us to look at more into. Cool. And finally, how important do you think it is making a resource private? Again, a really good question. We discussed this right at the start of building Tangram. Originally, we wanted to do the same kind of thing as with the code in our libraries, which is keeping the public API as kind of small and concise as possible, and hiding all the implementation details from any consuming app. The problem with resources here, though, is if you want to make one resource private, by default they're all private, and you need to include resources in a public.xml file, which it's not that bad, but it's kind of an additional maintenance burden. So that's why we chose not to. Awesome. Thanks for all your questions, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. If you want to follow any blog posts that I'll write on those additional things, at Jamie Sanson on pretty much every platform. I've also got a blog site, jamie.sanson.dev, that you can tune into. And yeah, thank you all for coming.